So this is an overview of OpenFN. OpenFN is the platform that connects CommCare to Salesforce. To give you a little bit of background, when we reached the point where we realized that CommCare was not going to be a comprehensive reporting and data management solution for what we would want, we then looked for alternatives. I kind of focused on Salesforce because I had a lot of experience with that. But then to get the data from CommCare into Salesforce, there's a question of either doing a custom integration or trying to find a connector platform. There are different sorts of connector platforms out there, but often they're quite focused on large businesses that can pay a lot of money. Um, but how I found OpenFN, which is kind of, I think that they have some kind of more business type customers, but they're more focused on kind of nonprofits and like more resource strapped organizations too. But basically, kind of earlier on, I had worked at this organization called Vera Solutions. That's kind of like a Demagi competitor, and Taylor Downs was one of the founders of Vera. And while he was still with Vera, he had started kind of building out this kind of OpenFN platform. And at the time, he had been doing it for Salesforce to ODK. But kind of like over time, he built it out to kind of connect with different sorts of softwares. And so, kind of when I was looking into different possibilities, he had reached out to me about OpenFN. And so then I looked into it more and ultimately went with it because setup time and kind of cost to set up was going to be much lower than doing a custom integration. And it seemed like it would meet all of our needs. Maybe not be able to do everything as perfectly as we might like, or to have as much kind of oversight and control as we might like, but also it just really cut down the development time and resources, and building a custom integration is quite complicated. So it was really great to be able to use this platform. So right now you can find the contract in one of the folders, but we're paying I think $430 a month, and then that price, that was like an introductory 12-month pricing, and then after that it would go up to 600 and something a month, and that's for kind of having 5 jobs and 75,000 runs on this platform. But I would say that the pricing can probably be flexible, and so you know I'm sure things could be figured out as needed. But just to kind of go over kind of the platform itself and what we had set up, if you go to openfn.org, then if you came to projects, and we'll just, the only thing you need to work on is the Miracle Fee project. This Stephanie's project isn't anything, and it can just be deleted. So the way the OpenFN works is that there are jobs and there are triggers. A job is the like code container, and the trigger is like kind of what action causes the code to run. So we ended up having 5 different jobs, and some of this, the reason why we needed 5 had partly to do with photos and how photos are stored in CommCare, which is as attachments to a form. So we're kind of balancing the fact that when we're thinking about pulling in data from CommCare, the triggering action could be a form being submitted, or it could be a case being updated. And so ultimately, these jobs kind of take advantage of both, where the add new patient and add new visit is based off of a form submission, and that's also a way of getting any photos that are attached. And the update patient and update visit are based off of a case update. And so, those updates could be triggered off of different things, such as a missed appointment form being logged, or an edit patient form being logged. So rather than having different jobs for every single form, right, we try to consolidate and just focus on a case update. But we couldn't do that completely because we did have to take in mind that to get the photos, we had to be looking at the patient registration form or the kind of log a visit form. So that's why we have this differentiation. So if you were to click on a job, you would see the code, which can seem kind of intimidating, I'm sure. But actually, Taylor did a lot of setting this up, and he can help to answer questions or to make changes. We don't really have an official sort of procedure or standard or contract in terms of what sort of changes he makes, but I think that he wants this to be successful, and so he'll be quite helpful. But kind of looking for Miracle Feed to first try to take what already exists and try to, see patterns and see what's already been done and to copy that. But if issues come up or questions to come up, to then email him and he can help to solve it. So um, if you're here, you could click edit and you could get into this more. But we also have on GitHub, we have a Miracle Feet repository, and that's also where this code is living. And it's just an easier way of working with this. So if we went here, we were on add new patient. And so if we came here and just also clicked on this, it's just a bit easier to look through it. So basically, like I said, what's happening here with add new patient is that we're looking at the patient registration form. And again, Taylor did a lot of this, so I couldn't even explain anything. But basically, what we're looking to do is we're looking to take the data that comes from CommCare and reformat it to be a kind of to match with the syntax for a Salesforce field. But a lot of times the matching is one-to-one. It's not super complicated what we're doing here. So one of the first things maybe to focus on is that we have this upsert function on row 21. So what this is basically saying is when this code gets triggered to run, look at the data in Salesforce at the patient, see if there's an existing patient, and we're matching this basically looking at the CommCare case ID, and then there's a field in Salesforce called CommCare case ID. So it's looking to see if there's a match, and if there is, then we're going to update that patient. If there's not, then we're going to create a new patient. And then from there, we're just kind of running through all the different fields that we would want to populate from the patient registration form and kind of have come into Salesforce. And there's just different reformatting that we need to do. And that's a lot of what this code is doing. So sometimes it's just one-to-one, a straight population, especially if we were talking about something like a text field. But for some of these things, for something like first name, for instance, human proper, we were just making sure that was capitalized. We're looking for the first letter in each word to be capitalized. Because, often with the data, we'll get things where it was all written in lowercase or it's all written in uppercase or, one's lowercase, one's uppercase. And so we're just looking for some standardization. So for something like registration date, so, there's some code that we're using to basically reformat the date as we get it from CommCare and put it into a format that works for Salesforce. And so this is something that if you had other date fields that you wanted to do in the future, where you could just copy this code and then kind of plug in new field values like for the Salesforce field, which is here, and then we have our CommCare field here. So you see we have different date fields that are all kind of going through that. So one other sort of reformatting that we did have to do with something like the abnormalities field, or if we're doing something like diagnosis, or really any of the multiple choice type questions in CommCare. The value that we're getting from CommCare is the backend value, which has underscores in it, and it's not a great experience. And it's maybe not always everything that we'd want to say in Salesforce either for an end user experience, but the compromise we've made is that we'll take whatever the backend value is. So if we're talking about abnormalities, for instance, the values are like hips, lowercase, spine, lower extremities, which is the lower underscore extremities. And we're just going to do some reformatting where we're going to capitalize and we're going to remove the underscores and put spaces instead. And so that is the change that goes from CommCare to Salesforce. And then that's mapping to either pick list or multi-select pick list field types in Salesforce. And you'll just see so this is for multi-select, and so we're saying that there can be multiple values, and there's just kind of a formatting that we need to make sure happens when we're talking about Salesforce. And this handle multi-select is a function that Taylor wrote. But I think what it's doing is it's again doing some of that reformatting around capitalization and removing underscores, and it's also adding a semicolon between each value. Um, again, Taylor did a lot of these things. I've mostly just kind of, I populated in all of the fields. Once I had a template, I would just replicate and kind of make sure that these fields were filled in. But certain functions that we have, like handling the multiple choice questions or handling date fields or also handling photos, like this handle photo function, he had written that code and then kind of had done an example of how to do it, and then I would just replicate for other questions that we might have. Right? I mean, so this is an example for add new patient. When we're talking about add new visit, this is getting triggered off of a log of visit form being submitted in CommCare. And it's quite a similar structure where again we're doing an upsert function and we're going to be querying the visits in Salesforce, and we're going to look at the CommCare case ID that is in the form that's coming over, and kind of referencing back to Salesforce and then creating, typically we're going to expect to just be creating a new visit here. But there are a lot of similar things in terms of doing, right. So these are all field mappings for the visit object in Salesforce, and this is the field name, the API name in Salesforce, and then this, for instance, is the case property name on the visit in CommCare. And so again, a lot of times it's a one-to-one match, but there is some reformatting again that we need to do around date values, multiple choice, different things like that. And again, handling the photos as well. If we come to update patient, so basically this is getting fired anytime that there's an update on a patient case in Salesforce, in CommCare. And an update can happen through kind of different forms that we have that update patient. Or if someone were just going into CommCare HQ and kind of manually editing a patient case, that would also get reflected and cause this job to run. But different forms that we have that would update a patient are, well, 1, log a visit, 2, edit patient, 3, missed appointment, kind of the log a contact that happens through future appointment. So those are the forms that could be causing a patient case update. But again, like I said, it could also just be that someone's going in and manually making an update to a CommCare case for a patient such as you, or maybe someone like Adriani might do that. So we're saying that we're going to do an upsert on patient if the date modified is not equal to the date that it was opened. And so we have that just so that we're not triggering both the kind of add patient and patient upsert jobs at the same time. And then a lot of this is just an exact replication from the add a patient code. And it's just doing the same thing. All the same fields are getting mapped and being remodified as needed. And if we look at upsert visit, very similar. The reason we have a distinction for visit, so there's no other form that's going to be updating a visit after it's been created, but it's still a possibility that we could update the visit within CommCare HQ, either just individually editing it, or maybe we need to do a mass update to kind of modify a mistake that might have been made when importing visits from ICR, or maybe we've kind of like noticed like data quality issues, and so we're going to do kind of fix it in Excel and then do a mass update back to CommCare HQ. Right, the goal is that edits are happening in CommCare HQ, that way that they both get reflected on the phone, and then they get pushed to Salesforce via OpenFN. But we're not looking to do any direct editing within Salesforce. We want it to happen within CommCare HQ, and that way it goes to the phone, and it could also go to ICR, and it can also go to Salesforce. So again, we're just looking to do an upsert if the date that this is occurring is different than when the date the visit was opened. And we're again kind of just going through and doing the same field mapping from CommCare data to Salesforce data, and the same kind of reformatting as needed for certain field types. And that's what you'll find there. And then this last one, Upsert Clinic, it's really simple. It's basically looking at the organization structure in CommCare, and what is called in kind of CommCare backend terminology is a location. And so we need to find when locations are created and then create clinics in Salesforce. One thing just about how kind of things are stored within CommCare at the location, there wasn't really a way or very obvious way to make a distinction between a clinic being created and like a region being created or a country being created. So because one, we just don't have a very good resource to go to at Damagi, or like a clear person to go to talk with about these things. And two, because it wasn't going to be a big issue just to do some manual cleanup on our end, because we're not creating locations so often. Within CommCare, I just had it set up so that every location that gets created in CommCare comes into Salesforce. And so what this is doing is that it's basically like the main thing that it needs to do is it needs to map the the ID in CommCare to kind of this cast location ID field in Salesforce, so that we have that unique identifier that we can use to reference any edits in the future. And then basically we're just populating the name. So there are only two things that we're doing right now. We could in the future look into this more with with Damagi, to try to figure out if there are more fields from kind of location records in CommCare that we can map to Salesforce. But I think what we get right now is fine, and there's not really that much information to be shared anyways. So that's doing that. And then so going back to OpenFN, if you just look at our triggers, again, Taylor set these up, so I wasn't so involved in this. But like for instance, right, for the appointment case update, we're looking that the case type is appointment. For the location updated, that was the clinic. We're looking for this kind of type of location. When we're talking about where patients are involved, we're looking at case type patient. We have one for that add new patient. It's when the kind of registration form is being logged, or we're identifying it with this OK. And with the visit form, we are saying that this log visit details form is being received. And I guess one thing I'll show just quickly from CommCare HQ that's also relevant here. So there's a feature in ComCare called case. You can do case and form forwarding, and so then that's how we're getting the data to OpenFN, is that we have case and form forwarding set up. So if I can just find where that is. I always forget where this is. I think maybe it's in project settings. Oh, yep. Okay, so under the project settings, when you go to this wrench and come here, under integration, you see data forwarding and data forwarding records. So we have these forwarding locations set up so that we're forwarding all forms that get submitted are sent to this kind of our space on OpenFN. And the same with, so we're forwarding patient and appointment cases to OpenFN. And so that means that some things are coming to OpenFN and they're not going to trigger anything, and that's fine. But some things, or sorry, basically what I was looking to say was that um, some forms are getting forwarded that aren't relevant are going to trigger a job, but the case forwarding should always trigger something within OpenFN. And for some of these things like the canceled here, I actually don't know what this is. It's not something that I've looked into too much, so it could be something that you might want to investigate or just make sure you understand more fully. Basically, what I saw in my testing earlier on was that as I needed things to come into Salesforce, they were, and it wasn't quite clear everything that kind of ComCare to OpenFN, like kind of always what exactly was happening there. But I think that's something not kind of an urgent need, but maybe down the road you can look into a bit more just to make sure you more fully understand how data is getting from ComCare to OpenFN and ultimately into Salesforce. And just making sure that that's kind of as seamless and foolproof as possible. Um, so that is that. I mean, basically it just sits there and you shouldn't need to do anything with it. So if we go back to, so when we're talking about OpenFN, basically these things are set up. You shouldn't really need to interact with it too much, except if you see that there's an error, kind of maybe certain data isn't getting into Salesforce from ComCare, and probably the point of failure is OpenFN. Or maybe you decide to add a new question to ComCare and you want to have it also go into Salesforce, that's where then you would need to come into OpenFN and add that question and do that mapping here kind of among these jobs. And I think the first few times that you're doing it, it's something where you can reach out to Taylor and he could help to advise on it. The other thing that I'm doing is, I am monitoring it. And so you can do that via the inbox and the run history. And so basically with our inbox, we're able to see kind of what is a success and what is a failure. And then we can try to figure out, sometimes it might just be a matter of needing to click this kind of run button and have it run again, and then it will succeed. Or there's also a way to do a mass rerun of things when needed. But what you can do is you can come in and look at this form. And if you go to the very bottom, you'll see kind of what the failure is. And so, this, for instance, is telling us that this didn't end up going because a duplicate value was found with the same ICR ID. And so one thing that we have in Salesforce is that we're trying to prevent duplicates. So we're not going to allow two patients or two visits to exist in the system that have the same ICR ID. And the same with a CommCare case ID. We're not going to allow two values in Salesforce that have that. So it's a protective measure of having this in case, and not to the fact that this failed is not necessarily a problem. It's actually probably good that it failed because it means that those checks are in place. Kind of one thing that happened recently is that I had Taylor kind of help with doing a mass rerun of data, um, just because we were in kind of had so much that we needed to rerun. Though typically what you could do if, let's say, for some reason, one thing that we do have to sometimes deal with is that if we're doing a lot of mass updating in CommCare, like let's say you're going to go and mass update 10,000 patient cases in CommCare, it could be the case where we hit a Salesforce limit in terms of um, how much we can be kind of interacting with them via this integration. So it's something called an API call. And so there's a limit in the system that we can only do 27 Salesforce can only receive 27,000 API calls in a 24-hour period. So this is something recently where I was kind of doing an import for a Tanzania clinic and kind of went about it a bit more quickly and kind of not as thoroughly as I should have. So there are some mistakes that I needed to correct. So it just meant that I did kind of multiple rounds of mass editing and updating and ultimately hit this Salesforce error, which then caused OpenFN runs to fail. And so Taylor very nicely helped me do reruns of that. Not to get too much into that, but just to say that, if for whatever reason kind of there were a lot of kind of failures that needed to be handled or rerun, you can do a mass rerun from OpenFN, and there's this button called bulk retry, which is actually a feature that I had asked Taylor to add in. And so basically what you do is so you're entering in kind of like the first ID of what you want to run and the last ID, and then it's rerunning everything within that. So if, for instance, we just wanted to look at all of our failed jobs and we just wanted to kind of, before going through them individually and trying to understand what the issue is, we just wanted to do a mass rerun to see how many could be taken care of. Such as, again, like some limit had been hit and the jobs had stopped running, and so we needed to rerun them, let's say, kind of the next day. You could just say, like, I want to rerun 2656273 to 2658589, and then everything in this series is going to be rerun. One thing I don't quite like about this is that we don't have a lot of control over it. So you'll see that we have these project setting limits, and I actually don't know how. I don't think Taylor would probably actually be super strict on them since we're typically quite underneath our number of runs. But typically our allowed number of runs would be 75,000, and that resets every 30 days. So if we're kind of doing reruns on unnecessary things, such as kind of updates that had succeeded and we're running it again, that we're just unnecessarily taking from our limit. So kind of this feature is not as great as it could be, and hopefully it will become better over time where only failures are being rerun, and also we just get more notification about failures and have an easier time of tracking it. I would say right now it's quite tedious to kind of go in and to see why different things failed, and to kind of to do troubleshooting around that, because you always need to go into the kind of run itself to kind of troubleshoot through that. But typically, actually, it's not a lot of failures. It might just be a few over a few days. And typically, a lot of times, they just need to be rerun again. Something with the timing was off in terms of, like, let's say when CommCare is sending kind of the patients and the visits, that sometimes the visit just gets recognized for the patient, and so the visit job will have failed because the patient wasn't there. But then once that patient's been created, we just need to rerun that visit. So some things are still not as seamless as we would like, and I think it's something that is not an immediate need, but can be worked with Taylor on over time to try to have this be even more seamless and to require less interaction and oversight from us. But I would say, well, I'm sure that this seems somewhat intimidating. I don't think you really need to think of it that way. But I think that it could be good at some point just to do a mass review of everything. And it seems like I think that's something where Taylor could be worked with, and that you could try to export these records and go through them more easily. Um, but also, I would say, kind of typically when we don't have kind of import issues with CommCare, things are quite smooth in terms of just like day to day users are using the app, and then OpenFN is running those. And again, there might just be a few to check every few days and just kind of to see why they're failing and to maybe rerun them to get them to succeed. So that's what I wanted to cover over OpenFN. And certainly I think it'd probably be useful to just do an initial call with Taylor, and he can talk about some of these things, and talk about if you see errors that don't make sense, you can raise them to him and he can help to explain them. And I think if it was ever the case where you needed more dedicated support from him or someone on his team, that's something where some sort of contract could be figured out. We don't really have any sort of official technical support. It's quite just like, Taylor's a nice guy and he'll be helpful, but it could be useful at some point to have something more formal where maybe Miracle Feed is going to get a certain type of support or service from them, because everything is going through him at this point.